Aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan advances in the Senate with a big bipartisan vote. The Senate voted overwhelmingly Tuesday to move ahead with the $95 billion in war aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, bringing the bill to the brink of passage after months of delays and contentious internal debate over how involved the United States should be abroad. The vote to end a filibuster drew the support of 80 senators, 10 more than supported the bill when the Senate first passed it in February, virtually guaranteeing that the bill will soon reach President Biden's desk. A final vote could come as soon as Tuesday evening. The $61 billion for Ukraine comes as the war-torn country desperately needs new firepower and as Russian President Vladimir Putin has stepped up his attacks. Ukrainian soldiers have struggled to hold the front lines as Russia has seized the momentum on the battlefield and gained significant territory. Biden told Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Monday the U.S. will send badly needed air defense weaponry as soon as the legislation is passed. The House approved the package Saturday in a series of 4 votes, sending it back to the Senate for final approval. Quote, "The President has assured me that the package will be approved quickly and that it will be powerful, strengthening our air defense as well as long-range artillery capabilities," end quote, Zelensky said in a post on X. In fact, U.S. officials said about $1 billion of the aid could be on its way shortly, the bulk following in the coming weeks. The legislation also would send $26 billion in wartime assistance to Israel and humanitarian relief to citizens of Gaza, and $8 billion to counter China in Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific. In an effort to gain more votes, Republicans in the House majority also added a bill to the package that could ban the social media app TikTok in the U.S. if its Chinese owners do not sell their stake within a year. The foreign aid portion of the bill is similar to what the Senate passed in February, with some minor changes and additions, including the TikTok bill and a stipulation that $9 billion of the economic assistance to Ukraine is in the form of forgivable loans. Those changes appear to have brought 9 additional Republicans on board, meaning a clear majority of the Senate GOP conference supports the legislation. The February vote on an earlier version of the bill was 70-29. Opening the Senate Tuesday morning, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said the coming vote was 6 months in the making. Quote, "Let us not keep our friends around the world waiting for a moment longer," end quote, Schumer said. The package has a broad congressional support since Biden first requested the money last summer, but congressional leaders had to navigate strong opposition from a growing number of conservatives who question U.S. involvement in foreign wars and argued that Congress should be focused instead on the surge of migration at the U.S.-Mexico border. The growing fault line in the GOP between those conservatives who are skeptical of the aid and the more traditional Reagan Republicans who strongly support it may prove to be career-defining for the 2 top Republican leaders. Senate GOP leader Mitch McConnell, who has made the Ukraine aid a top priority, said last month that he would step down from leadership after becoming increasingly distanced from many in his conference on the Ukraine aid and other issues. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson, who put the bills on the floor after praying for guidance, faces threats of an ouster after a majority of Republicans voted against the aid to Ukraine. McConnell has made clear that stopping Putin is important enough for him to stake his political capital. Quote, "The national security of the United States depends on the willingness of its leaders to build, sustain, and exercise hard power," end quote, McConnell said after House passage Saturday, adding, quote, "I make no apology for taking these linked threats seriously or for urging the Biden administration and my colleagues in Congress to do the same," end quote. On Tuesday morning, McConnell said the Senate faces a test and we must not fail it. Johnson said after House passage that we did our work here and I think history will judge it well. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, a longtime GOP hawk who voted against it in February because it wasn't paired with legislation to stem migration at the border, praised Johnson after the vote and indicated he will vote for it this time. Quote, "The idea that the United States will be safer if we pull the plug on our friends and allies overseas is wrong," end quote, he said on X. The revised House package also included several Republican priorities that were acceptable to Democrats to get the bill passed. Those include proposals that allow the U.S. to seize frozen Russian central bank assets to build Ukraine, impose sanctions on Iran, Russia, China, and criminal organizations that traffic fentanyl, and potentially ban TikTok in the U.S. if the owner, ByteDance Limited, doesn't sell. That bill has wide bipartisan support in the House and Senate. Opponents in the Senate, like the House, are likely to include some left-wing senators who are opposed to aiding Israel as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has bombarded Gaza and killed thousands of civilians. Vermont Senators Bernie Sanders, an independent, and Peter Welch, a Democrat, both voted against the package in February. Quote, "This bill provides Netanyahu $10 billion more in unrestricted military aid for his horrific war against the Palestinian people." End quote. I should have done my Sanders impression for this. This bill provides Netanyahu $10 billion more. Never mind. That is unconscionable. So what we've learned from this experience is that American globalists and bureaucrats really want to crack this nut, and the American political class are very willing to mortgage the entire empire in order to get this done. So if throwing this extra $61 billion, I believe it was, specifically allocated to Ukraine, doesn't yield the results that our political class wants it to yield, they're going to end up hiring even more private military contractors and start auctioning off parts of the European military in order to aid their efforts. This war has not been going as smoothly for Western powers as Western media outlets wanted us to believe initially. I mean, if it were the case that Russia was just getting smoked and the Ukrainian military was doing ridiculously well against these big, imposing, overwhelming odds, then it would be impossible for the Russian military to have grown 15%. And in the past couple of weeks to months, the headlines we've been seeing from the news media have become noticeably less cavalier. They've actually begun to acknowledge that the Ukrainian military is struggling. This does not mean, however, for any would-be multipolarity enjoyers or BRICS gang enthusiasts, that this is going to be a walk in the park from here on out. This is not going to be some cakewalk. We are not on easy street. This is definitely an uphill fight, and in my estimation, it is more likely than not that the West will win this conflict. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz were not effective enough at building a coalition within the GOP to prevent this bill from passing the House, unfortunately. You know, it really seemed like Mike Johnson was going to say yes on pain of losing his position as Speaker of the House. But it's entirely possible that he made some sort of backroom deal with Democrats that they would continue supporting him if he said yes to this bill. And what a lot of the sort of normie conservatives to normie right-wing people will say is that, oh man, wokeness is ruining this country and it's the reason we're going to fall behind globally and, you know, this is why China's going to overtake us, blah, blah, blah. But the important thing to understand is that wokeness definitely hurts America, but the U.S. has a very long way to fall, and China still has a very long way to go before it totally supplants and overtakes the U.S. on the world stage. The fact of the matter is, as it stands, the U.S. is a hyperpower, and it has functionally infinite money to burn through on this conflict. And it's really like roughly 2/3 of the American political class are anti-Russia to this degree, that they're willing to mortgage the empire in order to win. Because the only Democrats who opposed this bill did so on the grounds that it also gave aid to Israel, which is a related but still distinct conflict. So in my view, the only real hopes that Russia has are to now end this conflict as quickly as possible without crossing a line, which is why I think we've seen Russian forces slowly turn up the heat in recent weeks, or Trump getting into office in November and deciding to strike the greatest deal the world has ever seen and not side with the other 2/3 of our political class who still want to throw money at this problem. So all in all, that's still like a 75% chance that this endeavor blows up in the faces of the Russia, China, Iran axis, which is unfortunate because we know that our political class will be intent on crippling them and ensuring that nothing ever challenges their power ever again. So the main power left standing on Earth indefinitely will literally be a rainbow-colored Lizzo statue with nuclear capabilities. And this is not a situation that anyone with even half a brain would want. And there are a lot of people on the dissident right who don't understand this, that the choice we have to make is between a world where there is still a shot at having a sane, orderly, functional society because political power is divided and distributed among multiple centers that aren't working together or are at odds with one another, or alternatively, that power is monopolized in the hands of Eurocrats and the American elite, really the American elite, because they'll continue to dominate Europe at this rate, and there's no chance of them breaking free. The American elite who will impose wokeness or whatever comes after wokeness, whatever is even worse than wokeness, on the entire world indefinitely. To quote the political theorist Carl Schmitt in his book The Concept of the Political in a passage I think is relevant, quote, "To the state as an essentially political entity belongs the jus belli. In other words, the real possibility of deciding in a concrete situation upon the enemy and the ability to fight him with the power emanating from the entity. As long as a politically united people is prepared to fight for its existence, independence, and freedom on the basis of a decision emanating from the political entity, this specifically political question has primacy over the technical means by which the battle will be waged, the nature of the army's organization, and what the prospects are for winning the war. The development of military techniques appears to move in a direction which will perhaps permit only a few states to survive, that is, those whose industrial potential would allow them to wage a promising war. Should smaller and weaker states be unable to maintain their independence by virtue of an appropriate alliance, they may then be forced, voluntarily or by necessity, to abdicate the jus belli. This development would still not prove that war, state, and politics will altogether cease. The numerous changes and revolutions in human history and development have produced new forms and dimensions of political groupings. Previously existing political structures were destroyed, new kinds of foreign and civil wars arose, and the number of organized political entities soon increased or diminished." That was a very high information density passage, but it's really just a long and fancy way of saying that in the future, that is basically now from when Schmitt was writing, most smaller countries will not have the ability to declare war because the industrial potential of most of the world's nations is too low for them to wage promising wars. People will not want to fight because there's just no chance of them winning. Ukraine would have folded so long ago if it weren't for all that aid from America and the EU propping it up. So all conflict will pretty much be great power conflict, and these ideas of Ukrainian autonomy or nationalism are really just pipe dreams. If you are not a great power, you will be under the aegis of a great power, and you will be their puppet. So you got to make this choice. Are you on the side of the flute, or are you on the side that has a shot at freedom? Anyway, that's it for this video. This is the first video on this channel covering geopolitics or international relations. I hope you enjoyed it. Please share it if you really liked it. That is the #1 way you can get more eyeballs on this channel. Help me grow the channel if you would. And red channels will catch you in the next one.